Hello, Mr. B. It's me, Ms. Burt. And rather than giving you abstract guidelines in a non-face-to-face meeting, I decided to create scoring guidelines for parts A and B of question 1 and parts A, B, and C for question 2. So I'm going to briefly go over this information, and after you've reviewed the information and tried to score one or two of your essays, then I think it would be appropriate for us to touch base with me. Okay, let's get started by looking at part A of question 1. So for question 1, just a note, all the responses should explain how each concept is related to the outcome of that study. And it should not just be about defining each idea or just giving a general comment based on each concept. So point 1 discusses the experimental versus correlational. Essentially, the responses should define both types of study, and then they should again connect back to the specific study with the good luck golf ball situation. So if the student does discuss the experimental study and connects it back to the example, then they receive a point for this part. If they do not correctly discuss experimental and correlational study, or they don't connect back to the actual study that's mentioned in the example, they should not receive a point. Moving to point 2, significant statistical difference. My understanding, also I forgot to give you this disclaimer, my understanding of the terms and the concepts may be wrong, so please feel free to edit the guideline to correct information that I may have misunderstood. Okay, so for point number 2, significant statistical difference, my understanding is that it's plus or minus 5%. So they should mention the actual statistical difference within their response, and then they should define what that means, like significant versus insignificant. And then please don't give a score to those who just reference the term without really going into an explanation about it or connecting it to the study. Now we are all set to look at the next point. The last point for part A is the connection between superstition and self-efficacy. The responses that receive a score should talk about superstition as a psychological deal that produces sometimes performed performance just because kids believe in themselves. They have that self-confidence, or they try harder, their persistence is greater, or etc. Students should not receive a score if they just discuss again the definition of one or both of the terms, and if they don't connect it back to how self-efficacy is possibly increased. Now we'll look at part B for question 1. For part B, all responses should again explain how each of the concepts or ideas contributes to either the development of superstitious beliefs and behaviors or to the maintenance of superstitious beliefs and behaviors. So first is the illusory correlational concept, and then the students, in order to receive an actual point, they should discuss or explain how researchers pretty much made a connection between the mention of luck and connected it to actual success, or either a discussion of how there was no connection at all, and so that could have been a misconception on the researcher's part. Definitely they want to talk about how the correlation is just that people try to connect the two variables, but they are totally unrelated and there's no influence from one to the other. And then, of course, don't score if there's incorrect information or limited explanation where it does not connect back to the whole luck concept mentioned in the example. Okay, so then for the next concept, positive reinforcement, students should have some mention of positive reinforcement, what it is, obviously receiving some type of extrinsic motivation or something. And they should be able to connect that to the idea of creating superstitious beliefs or impacting superstitious beliefs and behaviors, or the conservation or the maintenance of the superstition. So the students will receive a score if they successfully explain how success led to the participants' belief that they were lucky and that that positive reinforcement caused them to actually produce behaviors that made them successful. Students should not receive a score if they're incorrect again with any of the information about positive reinforcement, or if the explanation just seems redundant, like they just say the term, but they don't really explain how it connects back to the example. Now we're ready to look at points 6 and 7. Point 6 relates to the external locus of control, and the responses should actually discuss the fact that this phenomena occurs when there's a belief that only outside factors matter. It doesn't matter how hard people try or what their diligence level is. It's more about external factors. So they should be able to connect that back to the example that they've been given, and they should receive a score point if they explain in a pretty logical, relevant way what external locus of control relates to, and then they should be able to, again, connect it back to the development or the maintenance of superstitious belief or behavior in that specific study, of course. And then they don't receive a score point if they are unable to describe the external locus of control, or they mix it up with the internal locus of control, or anything that prevents them from accurately explaining how this concept relates back to the study example. And then finally, for question 1, we have point 7. So they are able to garner 7 points, 1 for each of the different elements or ideas discussed. For episodic memory, students should be able to define episodic memory as something that's dependent upon experience, and then they should be able to relate it to the beginning or the onset of superstition or superstitious beliefs, or to the conservation of superstitious behaviors or beliefs. So they receive a score point, students will, if they're able to give a satisfactory explanation and connect it to the study, and they will not receive a score point if they talk about irrelevant factors or details, or they don't relate their information back to the actual study. Again, please let me know what questions you have, and now we're ready to look at the scoring guide that I created for question 2. Welcome back. Students must discuss the connection to limiting the acceptance of more women into the program when they discuss each of the points. So representativeness heuristic, their responses should include how limiting acceptance of more women could result from representative heuristic, in that people, or the people who are on the determining committee, could just take a mental shortcut based on what they know about women and just go from A to Z saying, oh no, they wouldn't be able to be successful in this program, of course, without actually considering individual like gifts, talents, skills, etc. The students would receive a score if they do give a correct description and a logical explanation. They would not receive a score if their explanation is illogical or there's erroneous information included in their discussion of representativeness heuristic. For point 2, belief perseverance, responses really should discuss how this perseverance of belief might prohibit or limit the acceptance of a new attitude toward believing that women could be successful in the actual program. So students who receive a score will have a correct description with a clear connection of how this belief perseverance could limit or hinder the acceptance of women. And of course, those who will not receive a score will not receive a score because they give you unclear information, or they fail to connect their description of belief perseverance to the actual example with the women trying to be admitted into the program. Now we're all set to look at the next point. Point 3 is group polarization. Responses should include a discussion of how majority mindset rules, and that majority mentality tends to just trump those who are the minority. So there are only a few people who believe the same thing. So the discussion that will allow students to earn a score point would include a correct description of group polarization, as well as a reasonable connection or explanation of how it might prevent or disallow women to be admitted into or even deemed as successful engineering students so that they could be admitted into the program. Those not receiving a score point might have illogical explanations or unclear information that when they try to connect the concept back to the specific example. Okay, let's take a look at Part B. Okay, for Part B, all responses should relate back to stereotype threat and predictive validity, not just an explanation of those terms, but how they contribute to the possibility of getting rid of the entrance exam. So for point 4, or stereotype threat, the responses must explain the fact that the women applying for the program may have heard about the difficulty of the exam and how females who took the exam struggle. As a result, they don't perform well because they've succumbed to their own anxiety, or they're distracted by worrying about this whole fact that women don't do well. So as a result, they end up not showing what they actually know. And a score point for this particular idea would include an appropriate discussion of that concept, but then connecting it back again to the whole example with the engineering students. A student not receiving a score point might just give a definition or briefly talk about stereotype threat without connecting it back to the example, or the student might have erroneous information. So they actually gave you the definition of just a stereotype instead of stereotype threat. For point 5, the last point for Part B, the concept is predictive validity. Students receiving a score point will accurately clarify or discuss how the test, the entrance exam, might lack predictive validity, and as a result, the test itself is an insignificant or inaccurate measure of success. And then those not receiving a score point would probably just give a surface report of what predictive validity relates to without connecting it to the example or discussing it at all. Let's take a look at Part C. For Part C, all responses should actually indicate how extrinsic motivation and modeling could help with the recruitment of female students into the internship program. And then, of course, the responses should include what each concept means or what it entails. For extrinsic motivation, the responses should include an expression of positive reinforcement, what it is, and how it could possibly increase the recruitment efforts and make them more successful so that more women are enrolled in the internship program. The reasonable answers will receive a score point if students directly connect extrinsic motivation to success with the internship program, and students won't receive a score point if they give incorrect information about what extrinsic motivation is, or if they fail to discuss how intrinsic motivation relates to the internship and recruitment. Finally, score point 7 for Part C, question number 2, is modeling. So all the responses should describe modeling, and then the response should go on to connect modeling to the improvement of recruitment. So a satisfactory response would depict what modeling actually is in this situation, and then how it would improve recruitment or increase interest with women so that recruitment is progressive. And then the students who don't receive a score point might have redundant information. They may just say modeling several times and say the same thing in a separate way, or the student may not connect the idea of modeling to the actual example that's given with the females being recruited into the engineering program. I hope that the scoring guide helps, and as always, I am available to you should you have any questions or anything you want to clarify. I know you are ready to score these essays. Good luck.